part of the Arts and Humanities Committee here in Takoma Park, and we put on great performances, lectures, documentary films, art shows here in the community center, and also work on commissioning art out in the community. For example, please go do visit our newest installation art on the corner of Flower Ave and, I forget the cross street, by where Pizza Movers used to be. We just installed something called Bird Calls. I'm wondering if it says street. Erie, thank you. Cross streets. And it's a wonderful new art piece that you can interact with. It's using an old phone booth so you can listen to bird calls, and it has sculpture involved with it too. So please go do visit that. Also next week we have a couple great events happening. Thursday will be a big night. We have documentary films happening here in the auditorium at 7:30 called Community Stories Festival. So a bunch of short documentaries. And also beforehand, there will be an art show opening. The show is called Man Made, and it will be happening in the atrium right outside the auditorium. So you can do a 2-for-1, see an art show, see some documentary films. Also, next Saturday, Mr. Gabe is going to be here in the auditorium at 4 p.m. So bring the kids, bring the grandkids, and enjoy some good children's music. So I would like to introduce our friend here, Lara Langer. I did get that right. Good. And I'm very excited as an art teacher myself to be learning more about some of the art in the National Gallery. And I'm really excited to take a trip down there after her lecture today. Thank you, Lara. Lara. Okay.
Thank you, Cami, very much. Good evening. I would like to thank the Takoma Park Community Center, the Arts and Humanities Commission, We Are Takoma, Susan Strasser, and Sarah Daines for supporting this event and inviting me to speak tonight. And I thank you, the audience, for your participation. Indeed, throughout my tour, I will ask for your own observations, so please feel encouraged and welcome to offer your own visual analysis. There will be no test or grading at the end of this talk, so no pressure. Just a little bit about me. I received my PhD at the University of Maryland in fall 2015 in art history. My main field of study is Italian Renaissance with a concentration in sculpture. Currently, I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the Center for Advanced Study in Visual Arts, or CASVA, at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Before becoming a member of CASVA, I volunteered at the gallery and led several gallery talks on the museum's rich collection of early modern Italian sculpture, of which I will present highlights for you tonight. The sculpture galleries at the National Gallery occupy the space on the main and ground levels of the West Building, the original museum. In 1931, the businessman and art collector Andrew W. Mellon commissioned a new building that would serve as the nation's public museum. This building would replace a smaller, older one that had been under the leadership of the commissioner of the Smithsonian Institution. In 1937, Andrew Mellon hired John Russell Pope to design the building, and its construction was completed in 1941. And here you have the building, and down the street, around 4th Street, is the newer wing designed by I.M. Pei. Mr. Mellon intended the gallery to be an educational tool, and as such, we see the works of art in the galleries organized by nationality. Each section is set in a chronological order. The NGA's Italian sculpture collection is one of the most extensive in the United States because of its array of examples by multiple important artists of the Italian Renaissance and of works in different media, such as stone, bronze, silver, and terracotta. One important thing to remember when looking through a sculpture collection in a U.S. institution is how exceptional it is to have examples of artworks from the early modern period on this side of the Atlantic. Rarity, value, expense, transportation, and authenticity are some of the issues curators must encounter when developing or expanding a collection. With these concerns in mind, I will discuss with you some of the more exceptional examples of the Italian Renaissance sculpture collection that I hope will inspire you to visit them on your own, either again or for the first time. And I have to include a little side note here. I went yesterday to visit the galleries again to look at a few things, and one of the rooms that I'll be talking about is actually being reconfigured at the moment. So some of the works are not in the room that I'll be showing you, but they have been moved down the hall. This is a common occurrence in which works get moved around for different viewing and or for curators to put different works of the collection on view, since there isn't space on the walls for everything. We will begin our tour on the main level of the West Building in Gallery 5. Our first artist we're going to look at is Mino da Fiesole and his portrait bust of Astorgio Manfredi, made in 1455. Mino helped to revive the category of the independent portrait bust, largely based on examples from the classical period. Our sitter here, Astorgio Manfredi, was the Count of Fusignano and the governor of Faenza, a town southeast of Bologna in the region of Emilia-Romagna in northern central Italy. He was also a condottiere, or mercenary captain, who offered his services to warring Italian city-states. He was also a strong ally of the Florentines and had close ties to the powerful Florentine family, the Medici, of whom we'll learn more a bit later. In 1455, Manfredi commissioned Mino to carve his portrait. Underneath the bust is an inscription that notes the sitter, Astorgio Manfredi, ruler of Faenza, age 42, and the bust being dated 1455, which you can see here. There's a signature that marks opus nini, which is a different form of mini seen on other works that Mino has signed. The inscription and signature in Latin were common in this period, as were nicknames for artists. Period writers have referred to Mino as Mino or Dino, and in 1464, the architect, sculptor, and theorist Antonio Filarete referred to Mino as Nino, the same name referenced in a 1456 letter by Giovanni de' Medici to the Duke of Milan. The bottom of the Manfredi bust, with its elaborate inscription, is a reminder that sometimes the more or equally interesting details to be found on a work of art is not necessarily seen just with the frontal view. Of course, it's not easy or accessible to turn over sculpture in a museum space. One other intriguing detail is that date of 1455 on the left side. It is in Arabic numbers versus the Latin Roman numerals, so this indicates to us that it was probably incised sometime later and not by the artist himself. Mino produced several known busts in addition to the Manfredi one, such as this example of Piero de' Medici, about 1453, at the Bargello Museum in Florence. Manfredi is seen in parade armor rather than battle gear. And we know that this is the actual suit that the sitter owned and that he would wear during processions. The details that we can find here of the chain shirt and buckled cuirass decorated with bands of rosettes, seen here, and here's the buckle, as well as the 3 bolts on the left side, which would indicate the attachments for a lance. Manfredi's face shows the individual characteristics of loose skin under the jaw, a thin upper lip, and a bulbous nose. You might notice the marble discoloration on his jawline and nose by some darkened lines, here and here. The nose had some inpainting with white plaster fill done for restoration, and the water stains on the jaw are likely from cleaning. Otherwise, we would describe this piece as being in extremely good condition in the way that it was found and has remained over time. In the same room as the Manfredi portrait bust, we have 2 more works attributed to Mino, the marble reliefs of Virtue's Chastity, Charity, and Faith. These were produced around 1475 to 1480. In general, we do not know too much about the life of Mino da Fiesole. He was born in 1429 in the small town of Casentino, east of Florence. His training is unknown. The first work associated with the artist is the portrait bust of Piero de' Medici that we just looked at. Mino's success as a sculptor is marked by his 2 sojourns to Rome, roughly 6 years each, thereby allowing him to establish 2 active workshops in Florence and Rome. Mino's workshops were very prolific. They were responsible for having produced 12 large tombs, about 10 portrait busts, numerous Madonna and Child reliefs, altars, ciboria, tabernacles, and more. At times, the acquisitions for a collection leave more questions than answers. These 2 reliefs attributed to Mino are thought to be part of a tomb for Francesca Tornabuoni, previously located in the Tornabuoni Chapel at Santa Maria sopra Minerva in Rome. At some point in the late 1580s, the tomb was removed from the chapel when the Nari family purchased the space and moved into the new sacristy. However, at some point, the tomb was dismantled and eventually lost to posterity. Francesca died during childbirth in September 1477. Mino died in 1484, thereby giving us a terminus antiquem for the work's production, although some have suggested an earlier date of 1480, the year Mino left Rome for Florence. Giorgio Vasari, the 16th century writer who was the first to write a systematic, multi-volume text on major Italian painters, sculptors, and architects of the 14th through 16th centuries, described the tomb as having reliefs of the 3 theological virtues, faith, charity, and hope, set in a row in a niche above the effigy of the deceased. Relief figures in niches like these 2 examples can be found on tombs above the sarcophagus, flanking its sides, or below. For example, the tomb for Cardinal Louis Delbecq by another important 15th century sculptor working in Rome, Andrea Brenio. On this tomb, you can observe the 2 relief figures on either side of the sarcophagus, here, above the epitaph base. In this photo, reconstruction of the enormous funerary monument for Pope Paul II at St. Peter's, done in the mid-1470s, produced by Mino and another artist, Giovanni Dalmata, reliefs of the virtues are below the sarcophagus, along with scenes of the creation of Eve and the fall of man, here. While Francesca Tornabuoni's tomb more likely would have resembled Albrecht's monument than Paul II's, these examples give you a visual framework to consider the National Gallery reliefs. In the field, we might describe the virtue reliefs as highly plastic, that is, carved in high relief and accentuating the robust qualities of limbs, facial features, and even musculature to present the illusion of a real form. Repetitive details of the knotted belt underneath the breasts, long and angular folds of drapery that repeat throughout their composition. These appear in other renderings known by Mino. He composes his figures in a contrapposta stance, wherein the straight leg is weight-bearing and the other bends as the torso slightly turns in the opposite direction. This is a more dynamic pose that artists often emulated from classical works than were more typically seen in the medieval figure types. You might also notice that the figures are reverse images of each other, although not identical. A closer look will show you that the carving of Charity in her niche reflects a more confident and sophisticated hand. There is more illusionary prowess in the handling of the ridges of the shelled niche interior. The layers of the sheer, thin drapery are given careful attention, particularly around the bind of the rope belt, the folds around the curves of the body like the breasts, and the wrapping around the baby. The baby is representative of one of the world's orphans, who in a gesture of supplication leans his head back and opens his mouth to receive nourishment. Faith stands with her attributes, which are here partially broken, of a cross staff and chalice. If these figures of charity and faith were indeed intended for the now lost tomb of Francesca Tornabuoni, And if they were placed above the effigy, it is possible that you would have seen them flanking the third theological virtue, hope, due to the position of their turned heads facing a third central figure. The history of Francesca's tomb and its possible reconstruction remain a challenge for scholars. However, these enigmatic works can already teach us a lot about the kinds of images that were popular with commemorative monuments, the ways in which an artist's busy workshop used efficient means to design and execute large, complex commissions, and the variations of style and technique that characterize what we today describe as the 15th century Tuscan or Florentine artistic style. And it is for these important reasons, as well as the good fortune to have these pendant pieces, each in very good condition, to be displayed together at the museum. In the same room as the three Mino works is this one by another Tuscan artist, Matteo Civitale. Matteo was born in Lucca in 1436. Although we are not certain, Matteo probably trained in Florence and in the Rossellino workshop led by brothers Antonio and Bernardo. Matteo produced several works of art in the town of Lucca. One of his most important patrons, the humanist Domenico Bertini, commissioned multiple works by the artist, including tombs for both he and his wife to be housed at Lucca Cathedral. Also located within the cathedral, Bertini commissioned Matteo to replace the current chapel, known as the Cappella del Volto Santo, that displayed a venerated wooden figure of Saint Sebastian dated to the 12th century. Bertini left detailed requests for Matteo's depiction of the saint to be displayed in a niche on one of the walls of the Cappella. He demanded that Matteo use the purest white marble and include gilded bronze arrows and halo. The NGA's polychrome terracotta version of the saint, done around 1492, is not quite the same as the one displayed on the Cappella. Sebastian is known as one of the protector saints against disease, especially the plague. At the time of the commission in 1482, Lucca was threatened by a bout of pestilence. After Peter and Paul, Sebastian was an important saint in Rome. He lived in the 3rd century CE. An imperial guard for the Roman Emperor Diocletian, Sebastian was accused of converting people to Christianity and eventually sentenced to death by being shot at by archers as a human target practice. Miraculously, he survived, discovered by the Christian Irene of Rome, who nursed Sebastian back to health, only to be denounced again by Diocletian before being actually executed. The gallery displays the figure in a niche, recalling the artist's other work at Lucca Cathedral. The position of the legs are reversed from the Lucca figure. The tilted head displays the saint with its eyes and mouth open in a seemingly rapt supplication to God. Although not a precise copy of the Lucca figure, we can learn from the gallery's example some of Civitale's approach to rendering the body, and his choosing to depict the moment after which the saint had been pierced by multiple arrows but survived. A moment that allows the artist to emphasize sensations of agony and tension by representing the figure with his shoulders pulled taut and hands clasped behind him. In a slight contrapposto stance, his head is twisted in the direction of heaven. As we continue our tour, we move 2 galleries over into room 9, where we will find several works attributed to the artist Andrea del Verrocchio in his workshop. Born Andrea di Michelicione, although his training is unknown, it's likely he may have trained with the goldsmith Francesco di Lucca Verrocchio, and inspired by his master and teacher, Andrea at some point took his name to pay homage. The nickname Verrocchio translates from Italian as true eye, a likely reference to Andrea's exquisitely refined skill at developing complex compositions. Throughout his career, his training served him well. He produced works in bronze, silver, terracotta, and marble, as well as having executed several paintings. Verrocchio had an enormously successful career and is one of the most astonishing sculptors, in my opinion, to come out of the Italian Renaissance. The majority of his attributed works remain in Italy, Thus, the gallery's display of these two busts, in addition to a marble relief attributed to this artist and or his workshop, and a terracotta work of a Puto figure I'll discuss later, are real treasures of the gallery's sculpture collection. Several well-known artists from the 15th century passed through Verrocchio's workshop, including Lorenzo di Credi, Perugino, Sandro Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci. More about that one later. The leading sculptor of Florence in the mid-15th century was Donatello. His death in 1466 gave rise to other artists, including Verrocchio, to take the helm as the leading sculptor of the time. As mentioned previously, the Medici family had an important and powerful influence in the city. The family made its fortune in banking. Family members held positions in the city's Republican government. They also had established a wide network of family and friends, or amici, who supported their political agendas. Furthermore, the Medici were large patrons of the arts. From 1469 to 92, the patriarch of the family, Lorenzo de' Medici, was known as Il Magnifico, or the Magnificent. In this work attributed to Verrocchio's workshop, Il Magnifico is represented in a portrait-style bust, wearing a robe and cappuccio on his head. Lorenzo was famously known to have a large, broad nose and forehead. His facial features have been immortalized in various paintings and commemorative coins. The wide network of the Medici Amici and its influence naturally over time made for feelings of resentment and jealousy among his contemporaries. Lorenzo became the patriarch in 1469 after the death of his father, Piero. He continued in his father and grandfather's footsteps by being a very involved patron of the arts, commissioning people like Michelangelo and Botticelli. As Lorenzo's political influence spread throughout the peninsula, resentments grew as far as the Holy See. Lorenzo gained the wrath of Pope Sixtus IV due to his attempts to secure landholdings in the regions of central Italy that the Pope believed fell under papal jurisdiction. A plan was hatched by various heads of rival families, such as the Pazzi and Murario, with the support of the Pope to depose Lorenzo and his younger brother Giuliano from power and secure control of the Florentine government. On Easter Sunday, April 25, 1478, the high priest during Mass at Florence Cathedral raised the chalice of the Eucharist, the signal for several assassins hiding in the audience to attack Lorenzo and Giuliano in the front row near the high altar. Giuliano was fatally stabbed. Lorenzo was wounded by a cut on one side of his neck, but he survived by being rushed behind the high altar and escaping through a door at the back of the church. This commemorative bronze medal, designed by a sculptor also close to the Medici, Bertoldo di Giovanni, is another gem of the gallery's decorative arts department. There's an entire room on the ground level of the West Building that's dedicated to Renaissance medals. It is a great collection. It's very rare to have such a large number of these medals in one place, and I very much encourage you to visit it the next time you're at the museum. This medal was made shortly after the attack, and it illustrates the moment of betrayal and treachery as well as Lorenzo's escape. On the right side, you have Lorenzo here within the Latin in the center saying Salus Publica, or public health. This is what we call the recto, or the front part of the medal, and on the obverse or verso is Giuliano in the center with the Latin words Luctus Publicus, or public mourning. In this medal, Bertoldo is referencing antique coins, another influence of the classical past. These were made throughout the period in the 15th century to commemorate usually an important figure and sometimes an event. It's more typical to see figures on coins in a profile, but here we have Lorenzo and Giuliano with slightly turned heads, which shows a change in taste happening in the mid to late 15th century. On the recto, the side with Lorenzo, you can see him exiting through the back here. This is behind the choir scene as surprised churchgoers look on, with the triangle of the lectern in the left foreground where the priest had made his signal. There's also the octagonal shape of the altar with its low walls and 8 columns supporting the cornice. This detail by Bertoldo is what we call an pictorial approach, gives it a sense of three-dimensionality and a narrative for the scene. It is believed that the brothers were attacked on either side of the choir, which is why Bertoldo shows the same scene in reverse and distinguishes the victims from the attackers by having cloaks, whereas the other characters do not have any defining clothing. Although it is not certain how many medals were produced or who they went to, Lorenzo quickly began a campaign to remind the public and those throughout Florence and beyond that without him and the Medici, the Salus Publica could not be maintained or thrive. In contrast to depicting his brutal death, seen here, the terracotta bust of Lorenzo's younger brother Giuliano, displayed next to Lorenzo's, is thought to have been made around 1475, before Giuliano's assassination at the tender age of 25. The bust might have been made to celebrate an event in which Giuliano participated in a joust tournament, of which there are archival records. He was known to have been an avid writer, intelligent, handsome, and he often went on diplomatic missions on behalf of the family. This bust shows a very confident Giuliano, his head held high, and he has distinguished features that are very different from his brothers, a softer jawline and more proportional features. Giuliano's features are quite a contrast from the fearsome Gorgon head decorating his breastplate, again another example of parade armor. Perhaps this is a symbol of the youth's valor and confidence. The terracotta bust may have been a model for a marble work or a final piece in of itself. The details of the armor, the patterning of the breastplate and fur trim, the feathers of the Gorgon, and even the curls on the hair of Giuliano suggests Verrocchio's hand played a direct part in its production. The position of the head, not directly frontal but turned to one side as you saw in the medals, become much more popular as the century moves on. Another clue to Verrocchio's attribution is his interest in playing with fantastical forms of parade armor and ornament, of which we have several drawings illustrating his experimentations. In another work at the National Gallery, located in the same room, and attributed to his workshop, is this wondrous, fantastic representation of Alexander the Great, done in the mid-1480s. The ornament and grotesque images were other forms of classical influences, known throughout existing villas and tombs. And in addition to the 1480 discovery of the Domus Aurea, the home of Emperor Nero, around 64 CE in the heart of Rome, more artists included complex ornament in their art. Based on drawings and other works by Verrocchio, we can develop our mind's eye to put the qualities of his style technique together to create an identity of the artist's creative individuality, or his disegno. Perhaps the longer you compare these two pieces, you might start to recognize the subtleties that distinguish one as by workshop assistants and one by the master. The careful observer will also notice the backs and sides of sculpture, if given the chance to see all sides of a work of art. Often these more oblique views offer us greater insight into the making and understanding of an object. For example, as seen in the side-by-side view of the Alexander relief with its extraordinary level of high relief, and the back of the Giuliano bust, which indicates the production process or the kind of mount that might have been considered to display it. We do know about the Lorenzo bust, on the other hand, was that it became part of the Medici propaganda and a symbol of Lorenzo's intention to reassess Medici authority after the assassination attempt. Lorenzo ordered wax portrait busts as a kind of votive to be placed in several churches throughout the city. One version of the bust was even dressed in the same garments Lorenzo was wearing during the attack. Verrocchio supervised the production of the statues by a wax specialist, Orsino Benintendi. The gallery's terracotta version is likely modeled off of the wax bust. To conclude this complicated tale, the Medici used their own ruthless measures to meet certain ends. The attackers had quickly disbanded, but they were eventually rounded up, tried, and put to death. This highly intense and violent moment in Florence's history became known as the Pazzi Conspiracy. And although it certainly threatened Lorenzo's position, he persevered as the paterfamilias of the Medici and of Florence until his death in 1492. As we continue on our tour, we leave the main level and descend to the ground floor of the West Building. Several galleries here display more sculpture from the Italian Renaissance, as well as objects from the museum's collection of 18th and 19th century European sculpture. In Gallery 15, we come across another work by Verrocchio, a puto poised on a globe made of unbaked clay, or terracotta. Its original function is not completely certain, but it was likely used either as a model for drawing, of which there are several examples that exist, or it could have also been a model to be cast in bronze, most likely for a fountain. There are 5 casts of the puto known in the United States, but all of them are believed to be 19th century copies. The dating of the puto relates to another sculpture similar in subject matter, the puto or angel with the dolphin, at the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, made around 1480. The pudgy baby angel figure, with its fleshy skin and curly-Q hair, became a trope seen in other works by Verrocchio and his contemporaries. There are many that exist in painting and drawing. For example, on the right, you have a drawing by the Italian artist Filippino Lippi. This is also at the National Gallery and it's dated around 1493. And then a painting by Domenico Ghirlandaio, another Florentine, and also at the gallery, done around 1470-75. If the National Gallery's puto was meant to be the model for a fountain decoration, we can imagine water spraying from the figure's puffed out cheeks. We refer to the position of this figure as a figura serpentiata. Hopefully this will play. And when you're in this gallery space, you get the opportunity to see it from all sides, which was purposeful on the part of the artist as to create not a single static view or face of the sculpture. It's a real play of the eye by giving this little man an active pose. You get to really observe the chubbiness in his legs, his belly, his hands and cheeks. And the precarious pose of the boy is adding to the sense of motion and action in the figure. In this next work, not currently on view, we have an exquisite example of a glazed terracotta scene of the Nativity by Luca della Robbia, dated around 1460. The della Robbia workshop, the subject of an upcoming exhibition at the National Gallery this February, dominated much of the sculpture market in Florence since its founding figure, Luca della Robbia, began working as a sculptor for projects for Florence Cathedral around 1430. Luca initially worked with marble, but by 1441, he switched almost exclusively to the glazed terracotta medium. Since the establishment of the della Robbia workshop, hundreds of terracotta works from the altars to portrait busts, heraldic shields, and more were executed. Members of the della Robbia family carried on the business long after Luca's death. His nephew, Andrea del Verrocchio, for example, worked with his uncle, and as a result, it's often difficult to distinguish the hand of one or the other. The glazing of terracotta is an ancient practice. Pigments come from the use of natural earth materials like cobalt blue, copper green, manganese purple. There has not been a definitive conclusion on which della Robbia produced this particular one at the gallery. The scene, the Nativity or the Adoration of the Christ child, described in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, depicts the Virgin Mary and her husband Joseph surrounded by cattle and angels, looking upon the newborn child. Images of the Nativity sometimes show the family either under the coverage of a stable consisting of a rustic roof or canopy upheld by wooden supports, and surrounded by farm animals or placed inside more of an interior space. In much of Lucca's early works, the colors of white, blue, and green dominated, providing a trademark look and style to the della Robbia workshop. Lucca's sons and nephew would experiment more and more with different colors. We can utilize the terms that we've been learning so far to describe this object: its high relief, its plastic quality, and its interest in showing you a more three-dimensional space with the bodies and the composition. The frame, just to note, is an example of a 15th century type and often included classicizing architectural details like the cornice and fluted plasters and decorated capitals. This is a really great example to show you along with one of the better della Robbia works that we have in the collection. We will conclude our tour by returning upstairs to the main level to room 6, situated between the other two galleries we visited earlier. Here lives one of the gallery's most popular and famous works of art, Leonardo da Vinci's Ginevra da Vinci, produced around 1474 to 1478, and it's the only known Leonardo painting in the Americas. Leonardo was born in 1452 in the town of Vinci. He first goes to Florence in 1469, and around 1470 he enters the workshop of Verrocchio. As I mentioned earlier, Verrocchio operated his own workshop in Florence and had attracted multiple important artists. The biographer Vasari wrote that while working on a painting, we'll come back to Ginevra, that while Verrocchio worked on the scene of the baptism of Christ, he called on a few assistants, including Leonardo, to paint some of the supporting figures in background. When the time came for Verrocchio to inspect the work that had been done, he immediately recognized the hand of his younger protege, and intimidated or perhaps envious of the quality of the line and delicate modeling, the master threw down his paintbrushes and vowed never to paint again. Can you distinguish which angel in the scene is done by Leonardo da Vinci? Any thoughts?
The one that's one that's still.
The one on the right or left?
The one that's on the little, like on my right.
This one?
Oh wait. Oh yeah. No, I'm thinking.
The one with the back? This one? Is that a general consensus, the one on the left? Okay, let's see. You are correct. It is the angel on the left. So why? Why do we know that this is the hand of Leonardo? Yeah, the hair. The painting is composed of tempera on panel and oil. The angels, the figure of Christ, parts of the landscape have oil paint in their composition. The use of oil, a medium inspired by artists working in the north of Italy, particularly and beyond Italy, like the Netherlands, France, and Spain. By including oil within the paint composition, it allowed for softer gradations of tone and shadow effects that could not be achieved in a tempera-based paint. Tempera being a permanent, fast-drying medium of pigments that are mixed in with a water-soluble binder like an egg yolk. An oil blend of colors and tempera became a hallmark of Leonardo's technique. As intriguing as Vasari's tale is, we don't really know if that event actually happened, but it does establish Leonardo's early training. Comparisons of drawings done early in Leonardo's career with that of Verrocchio's show a direct influence of the master onto the student. Leonardo was very quick at mastering the skill of drawing, a fundamental ability that all apprentices had to learn first. In his writings, Leonardo remarks on the importance of copying from the teacher and then moving on to developing a skill for drawing objects with three-dimensional effects. One of Leonardo's earliest commissions, and a masterful example of his oil-based technique, is seen in the gallery's remarkable portrait of the newlywed Ginevra da Vinci at the tender age of 16. And keep in mind, at the time he painted this, Leonardo was only 22. The panel had been cut at some point, eliminating the lower portion of the painting that likely would have showed her arms, probably crossed in front of her chest like that of the Mona Lisa. Ginevra is seen in bust length and framed by juniper trees behind her, the juniper being a play on her name, Ginevra. It's unusual to depict her in this outside setting. Often the landscape in a portrait is reduced to a view from a window in an interior. One of Leonardo's first experiments was showing subtle psychological expressions of a sitter. Unlike his later incarnation, the Mona Lisa, Ginevra is poised looking downcast and contemplative. Often panel paintings like the Ginevra have an image on the verso, the other side, the obverse. And here we see an allusion to porphyry stone painted on a backdrop. You see here. A laurel branch and juniper branch with the Latin inscription entwined throughout. It states, "Beauty adorns virtue." The palm is a symbol of the Virgin Mary, a clear iconographic sign that emphasizes the qualities of chastity, purity, and virtue, these characteristics that women were supposed to embody and were expected of a new bride. The juniper tree certainly calls to mind a halo that relates to this palm imagery. The palm and laurel were also symbols that were used for the personal emblem of Bernardo Bembo, a Venetian ambassador to Florence and a familiaris of the Medici. He's also a friend and mentor to Ginevra, and it's possible that he inspired the imagery on the verso of her portrait. With these visual cues, we can more understand her downcast eyes and demure expression. Another symbol of chasteness and modesty versus looking directly at you. This unusual portrait is likely to celebrate her marriage, although she's not wearing any adornments or jewelry that might express part of her dowry. Another indication that the intention of this work is to emphasize her chasteness and modesty. The intention of modesty, however, is disrupted by Leonardo's luxuriant touch of the brush, his application of rich colors set against her pearlescent skin. Her cheeks and eyes, the blending of the sky and greens of the tree, showcase Leonardo's technique of sfumato, or smokiness, a painting technique where the artist takes the flattened tip of the brush and works slowly to make thin layers of translucent paint that are applied to create that soft blend of colors. This gives a more subtle and direct illusion of volume and depth, and together will create this illusionary effect that happens throughout various parts of the composition. In fact, we might even describe it as sculptural or modeled, like we've seen with the high reliefs and the clay that we learned through Verrocchio in his training. Which is why we often forget that Leonardo was trained by someone who was originally a goldsmith and a sculptor. But this was a huge influence on his approach to painting, which he carried throughout his entire career. You are all now experts of close looking and visual analysis, and I hope that you visit the gallery and enjoy the treasures that we have right at our doorstep just down the road. Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask about anything? Christopher.
With so many pieces that the gallery has, how do you, as you know, in your role in the gallery, how do you determine which pieces you want to use to tell a story?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. The tours are often 45 minutes to an hour, and so it is up to the docent or the facilitator to pick items that really highlight the treasures of the collection, as well as give people an understanding of the time period and the importances that come out of the different artists and techniques from this particular period, which happens to be mostly 15th century that I spoke about today. So I go through the galleries, I see what's on view, and I see how certain artists could relate to each other or have references to each other. And when we're in this space, I like to often talk about things that are right next to each other or across the room so that people can have a more comprehensive and cohesive understanding rather than just looking at a separate object on the wall or in a vitrine and not understanding why they're in the same room together. I think that sometimes gets lost when you're on a gallery talk, to understand why these objects are in the room together. And it's fun to be able to show the little subtleties and differences and similarities between different artists of the same period, so it gives you a more cohesive understanding. And that's my approach to picking the works.
Can you explain a little bit more about the word plastic you were using?
Yeah.
What's the opposite of that in art?
Well, we use that term plastic as a way to articulate artists working in a sculptural medium, trying to give you a sense of illusion with that medium. So we're coming out of the era of the Middle Ages, or what we loosely define as medieval art, which I don't have for you as comparatives because of time, obviously. But it's a very general way to distinguish between the general qualities that were happening when we say the medieval style, which is to not give a lot of reference or preference to showing illusion on a two-dimensional surface. And so sculptors will take the opportunity that they're learning throughout the 15th century as they're developing more sophisticated eyes and techniques with media like terracotta and marble to show more formulated and incised bodies or animals or whatever it is that they're using on the surface to appear to have more dimension than they would. And so it's a way to articulate the complexity of skill that's developing throughout that century and beyond. And it kind of puts in your mind when you hear that word of something that's more concrete and solid.
Does that technique translate into appearing more lifelike?
Yes. So I mentioned at various points the influence of classical past, of ancient Greece and Rome, and this was a huge part of the identity of Renaissance Italians. They're very much connected to their forebears and their predecessors. There are a lot of archaeological finds happening throughout this time, and Vasari writes about this in his volumes, this sort of aura or the kind of dreaminess that Italian artists and writers thought about the ancient classical world. And a big part of that was emulating the art. And so there are a lot of references in classical periods of art where artists then were also trying to create very illusionistic reliefs or figures in marble and stone. And so this is very much a forethought in Renaissance artists who are trying to do the same thing.
You spoke a little bit about the one workshop that was the uncle and the nephew. I always forget their name.
The Della Robbia?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I remember years ago hearing something about the colors being used and why that was so important. Can you expand on about that a little bit?
So it was a technique that they developed with the glazing, and it became a hallmark. They glazed the terracotta after it had turned white in the process of making the clay harden. So they had that white base, and then they were adding on certain colors, and that white base with bright color additions became the hand of the Della Robbia, and it was very distinctive. their workshop also grew, so it was very large and very prolific, which is why it's more feasible to have exhibitions, for example, on the della Robbia. Although there are examples that are in better condition or done with a more sophisticated hand, sometimes it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish workshop versus master. The records, archival documents help with that. But it really became associated with their workshop. It was something that Luca della Robia started to fashion in the early to mid 15th century, and since he started that process, his family followed suit, and they stuck with that look, you could say, or style of the della Robbia, and having mostly the white figures with painted colors around them. It became like their hallmark. Yes.
It is a large part of this Italian Renaissance sculpture that has come down today. Was that produced in similar workshops? Was that like what was mostly going on?
So the question is, where or who make up these workshops in Italy, essentially? And Florence was really an epicenter in the time period of the early, mid, and late 15th century. They really dominated in terms of just an explosion of production. And so because you had earlier heavyweight sculptors like Donatello and Ghiberti and architects like Brunelleschi, they really established this tradition that was in Florence, and it was supported by families like the Medici, who patronized a lot of different works of art. And so it became just an epicenter for so many artists to come and train and develop their own skills and build their own workshops. And it just was the natural turn of events that Florence transformed itself into this artistic center because of the people that developed there in the early 15th century. And there is much more scholarship on centers outside of Florence nowadays. We know a lot more about the north, what's happening in areas in and around Venice, and then in the south in Rome and Naples. So it's not that they're not relevant, but it just so happens that the objects that I spoke about are some of the best ones from the National Gallery's collection, and that they are in and around the Tuscan, Florentine orbit. So you do have a lot of just works also that exist from them, and that they really represent the core of this artistic revolution, in a sense, happening in the period of the mid-15th century. Well, thank you very much, and I hope to see you at the gallery.